This is John, or Flying Dog Guitars. This project started when my brother, who's a fine artist, made me this amazing body blank out of olive wood and resin, amazing green pigment. I wanted to do something really modern with it, and so I thought of my Fender Meteora, which is Fender's latest offset design that came out a few years ago. So I started playing around with that design, but the body blank was narrower than the Meteora, so I made a shape that was inspired by it, something offset and different than a Jazzmaster. And then I started making a template out of that, just using MDF and drawing, and did some bandsawing and sanding to get it down to shape. I wanted to make a unique headstock design that was also modern and interesting, and I came up with this. And from there I created my templates. My next step was to really smooth out that body blank and get it nice and even, so I could start working with it and drawing the design on it, as you'll see here. So I would be ready to take it to the bandsaw. I don't have video of the bandsaw, but then I bandsawed it and then got a little off track because of the very difficult grain in places, but then instead of using a router, just use the belt sander to get it into shape. And you can see here, maybe not exactly the template, but it's a very pleasing shape to me. And so from there, that was the theme of this whole guitar. It's going to be modern and interesting and a little asymmetrical. The next step was starting on the neck and getting the truss rod in place, which went off pretty much without a hitch. And then I started transferring the design for the body cavity onto the back of the guitar, and then transferred that around to the front, just to visualize it and see where the controls were going to be. The next step was creating the body cavities, so doing the drilling and the routing to make the control cavity and the pickup cavities, etc., and then doing a nice round over around the body to make it a little softer and more pleasant in the hands. I usually do a belly carve and a forearm contour, but that just didn't seem right for this particular shape, where we're trying to create the illusion of a pool of water. I know Ben at Crimson Guitars is a fan of nothing but the super glue and masking tape trick for most jobs. I really like this two-sided tape that I found. It works really well with very little slippage, so that's what I use generally for attaching my templates to the body or anything else. Having done all that work on the body, it's now time to finish up the neck shape. I've already cut it out on the bandsaw roughly, so now we just need to get it down to shape using my original template for a Jazzmaster neck. And the beginning of this is going to go well, and I've got some really nice slow-mo footage of the routing. This is a fantastic Whiteside Ultimate Flesh Trim bit, which has really nice work with a nice smooth finish. But you'll see me make a horrible mistake later on. And here I make that horrible mistake. I lose my mind and lose sight of where I am in the project and accidentally do an uphill cut with disastrous results. But because I'm using paddles, I lost no fingers. Use paddles, folks. Here is the always terrifying task of drilling the holes for the wires to pass through between the pickup cavities and then down into the control cavity. Always scares me, but nothing disastrous happened this time. I found some beautiful olive wood to use for the fretboard for this guitar, which will match nicely with the body. To cut the slots, I'm using the fret slot template from StewMac and the jig from another company, but it uses the StewMac slotting templates. I've attached that to a nice piece of plywood, which I can then clamp to my work surface. Make sure I got the depth right for my 12-inch radius, and then just start sawing away on the piece of wood until I've got all 21 fret slots nicely sawed. cut and route the fretboard to size. Same olive wood, I was able to create a cover for the control cavity, did a little glue up, sawed it on the bandsaw, and then the belt sander got it really close to size so that routing on the template is really just shaving off the outside, the last little tiny bit, less than a 1/16 of an inch. Really the best I've done with a template. I've got my fretboard design all laid out, measured as precisely as I can, and so now it's time to cut it. I contemplated creating a template on a laser cutter, but that would require spending a lot of time learning software that I don't feel like learning right now. So I've decided to create a very simple, repeatable template using 3 pieces of wood, which I'll be taping to the board. And creating a little adjustable template for myself. Marked out the best fit for right angles. So I just need to tape it down. I've got a super awesome little bit here, which is a 1/4 inch shank, but it's just a 3/16 inch bit, and it's a pattern bit, so it's got the little collar, so it'll run along the edges here. Use the setup block to get the depth exactly to where I want, which happens to be exactly a 1/2 inch, which is convenient. So now it's just time to do it and hopefully not screw it up. Process worked really well until this point. I'm using a different double-sided tape and it moved on me here, so one of the inlay holes is badly misshapen. You can see on the far right here and coming up in the center that one of these inlays went terribly awry. I cut it back all the way to the fret slot, because I realized that the easiest way to deal with it is just to cut it back and then glue in a replacement piece of wood and then go back and reroute that particular inlay. My method for transferring the inlay hole shape over to the inlay material is to put some tape on it, cut out the shape, and then put that tape right on the inlay material and then cut around it. I use the disc sander here to get the sides of the inlay square and perpendicular, and then to get it roughly to shape. The final approximation of shape I do just by that I have a piece of 120 sandpaper on the surface of the table there, and I use that to do the final sizing. I also use that I've intentionally made the corners of these inlays round rather than square, and I do the rounding off also on that little piece of sandpaper glued to the surface. Here I'm using a circle template to mark the diameter of the roundovers I want to do on the corners to give me a target as I round them over on that sandpaper on the table. Since these inlays are also going to serve as the side fret dot markers, I need the 12th fret marker to stand out. So here I'm going to inlay a piece of wood into the resin inlay, so I'll be able to identify it. Now I'm using here a Dremel basically as a sort of overhead router, and then just cutting a tiny slot into the inlay. Now it's time to glue the inlays in place using brown super glue to help obscure any gaps. And once that's done, it'll be time to sand everything down flush. Not every inlay was a success. There were many casualties. Here I've used a safety planer on my drill press to thickness the headstock so I get the proper break angle. And I'll also use a hand drill to give myself truss rod access. Now it's time to glue the fretboard on. I start by putting in locating pins to make sure it doesn't move, then glue, a caul, and then lots and lots of clamps. Now it's time to clean out the nut slot. You'll see where this mysterious shape goes later on. Now it's time to radius the fretboard using a sanding block, which is tedious, and then checking for level as I go, and then making any adjustments necessary. I shaped the transition from the headstock to the fretboard mostly by hand, because I was afraid of things going wrong very quickly using the spindle sander. Bending fret wire, then cutting frets to length. I decided to get rid of the end of the fret tangs to make sure I'd never have to worry about fret sprout. I don't have a fancy fret tang nipping tool, so I just used fret nippers to cut off the tang at the ends, then sanded them down on either end using 2 different files, and repeated 44 times. Now it's time to hammer the frets into place. I'm using the brown super glue again, because I want that brown super glue to be what's visible where the fret tang would have been. flat file to get all the frets level with the neck, then an angled file to bevel the fret edges. Fret leveling, fret crowning, fret sanding. I'll do a more extensive fret polishing later in the build. Now it's time to carve the neck. I've marked how deep I want to cut back to give me the profile I want, while also not hitting the truss rod cavity. I'd never done anything like fine woodworking before I started building guitars a couple of years ago, so carving the necks was initially the most intimidating part. Now I find it the most rewarding and satisfying in the end. I've rasped down to my desired depth at a couple locations, and then I'm going to take it to that belt sander again to smooth it all out. Would have been better to do some more rasping, but anyway, in the end, after an hour or two of belt sanding, I got it level into the depth I want. Now I've marked out where I want to facet it. I just will use my Shinto rasp and start rasping away. This is the first time I've really been happy with the transition to the back of the headstock. When I routed out the control cavity, there are some rough edges, and I want to take care of that. So I'm going to put a piece of silicone in there that I've taped, and then I'm just going to put some resin in and let that cure, and then sand it down. Drilling out the holes for the neck bolts. You can't quite see it, but I'm using the neck plate I'll use as the template. Using a Forstner bit to drill out the channel for the output jack. You can see a lot of smoke, even though I tried to let the bit cool down. It clearly was way too hot. I like to recess the jack plate by cutting a bigger hole first and then the smaller hole for the jack to slide into. Then, lots of sanding. I spared you most of it. I set up a spray tent in the basement. I'm using a fantastic water-based clear coat from Crystalac, the Bright Tone instrument finish. It does an amazing job, and it's odorless. It's non-toxic. It's, again, water-based, so it's easy cleanup. Yeah, so this is my first time using a spray gun to do this. My technique is not perfect. Level sanding, starting at 800 grit, and then working my way through the grits up to 2000. After that, polish it. Clear coated over the fret, so now I've cut that back and now I'm going to do a final polish. But first I just want to make sure everything is flat and I don't need to do any additional leveling, and I did not. Just working my way through the grits and polishing. Here I'm using my Dremel and Stroppen compound as a polish. Now it's time to cut the nut, get it to shape so it fits perfectly in the slot, identify where the slots are going to go, and then cut the slots. Drilling the tuning peg holes, started by drilling a small hole all the way through, then coming back with a brad point bit, coming at it from each side to make sure there's no tear out. Then using reamer to get them perfect sized so that the tuners actually fit. And then attaching the tuners. So shiny! Also, you can see where that strange shape I cut out ended up. It's on the headstock. A bit hard to see here, but I'm drilling the holes in the neck for the bolts. making sure that the scale length is where I think it is, and then I'm going to check the alignment by putting in 2 E-strings and attaching them to my bridge and making sure it is centered where I think it should be. And it actually ended up being exactly where I expected it to be. Made a template on my computer to drill the post holes because those need to be quite precise. And here is the terrifying drilling, but it worked out. It was precise. I'm mounting the pickups directly to the body, which required modifying these pickup screws a little bit. Had to get rid of the threads on top to allow them to spin in the mounts, and then had to shorten them a bit. The last really terrifying drilling, I have to drill a hole to connect the bridge post hole to the wire channel so I can have a ground for the bridge. Hit it in the first try. Started the wiring outside the cavity for more room. I always like to do a treble bleed network so that the volume doesn't kill the tone, and then I use a 3300 picofarad cap for the tone because I don't like to kill all the tone with the tone control. It's also push-pull pots because I want to be able to split the humbuckers I'm using. And here we're going to drill the holes for the 3 controls. And the final wiring in the body. And here's the final result. I'm really quite happy with it. You can see I've continued a modern theme with both the pickups, which are Lace Alumitones, which are really cool. They have no traditional coils. And with the bridge, which is a Schaller Signum wraparound bridge, which is amazing and beautifully adjustable. I think it looks great. I like the inlay designs. I think they turned out nicely. I like the little positive and negative shape going on the headstock. Yeah, it turned out very close to what I had in my head, or had at one point or another. The plans changed. What you're hearing in the background and through this last section is, of course, the guitar itself. don't have the decals yet with my logo, so a cheat. And here the guitar will take its place among my other 3 builds. I'm really happy with it, and I think I know it's the best one I've done so far in terms of the overall quality of the build. Thanks for watching this far.